Good evening. The story I'm about to tell you is the tragic story of the Central Park Five. In the early morning of April 20th, 1989, the body of Tricia Miley was discovered in New York City's Central Park. She had been sexually assaulted and beaten so badly that she remained in a coma for nearly 2 weeks afterward. She took such a beating that she had absolutely no recollection of the attack. 5 Black and Latino youth would be apprehended, all confessing to the crime. Around 9 p.m. on April 19, 1989, the NYPD began to get reports that a large group of males were causing problems in the Central Park. The NYPD dispatched a large group of officers to the park to deal with the teenagers. Their behaviors included vandalism, throwing rocks at bicyclists, and harassing an elderly homeless man. At approximately 10:30 p.m., 5 arrests were made near the park. The officers began questioning the boys at the Central Park Police Station. Their testimony was used to develop a list of 33 teenagers said to be part of the devious group that night. Most of the questioning was done before parents were called. That same day, 28-year-old Tricia Miley arrived at her office by 7:30 a.m. She was employed at Salomon Brothers, an investment bank in downtown Manhattan. She was an associate in the corporate finance division. She had worked at Salomon since moving to New York, right after graduating from Yale Business School. According to Sarah Burns, who wrote the Central Park Five, Tricia made plans with her colleague and former roommate, Pat Garrett. Pat wanted to know about the stereo system Miley had just bought for her new apartment. Miley told Pat to come over that night so he could take a look at it. She told him to come around 10 p.m. That way she would have time to go for a run. After work that day, Miley went home to her apartment on East 83rd Street, where she lived alone. At 8:50 p.m., Miley left for her run. She was wearing black leggings, a long-sleeved white t-shirt, and running shoes. She had her AM/FM radio headset, and her house keys were in a small Velcro pouch that she would attach to her sneaker. On her way down the stairs, Tricia stopped to speak with her neighbor, James Lansing. They spoke for a couple minutes about jogging in the park. Tricia then walked out the door and headed to Central Park. You must understand that New York City in 1989 was not the same place as it is today. Citywide muggings were regular events. On average, 36 people were murdered every week in New York that year. Gruesome stories of homicides and rape dominated the headlines. The New York Times ran articles on at least 12 incidents that year in which a police officer was stabbed, shot, or killed. Any crime in Central Park was highlighted in the media as especially newsworthy. In 1980, a New York Times article described the city park system as a dirty, unkept, vandalized shadow of its former self. The once lush green park was now filled with graffiti and trash. The city simply could not afford its upkeep. We know that on the night of the attack, Tricia Miley followed her typical routine. She jogged into Central Park at the 84th Street entrance, then turned onto East Drive. She then turned onto the 102nd Street Cross Drive, planning to head south again and loop back to 84th Street. At approximately 9:15, about halfway between the East and West Drives, Tricia Miley was attacked. She was hit on the back of the head with a large branch. She was then dragged into the woods and raped over and over again. Her attacker beat her in the head and face with a rock. Tricia was tied up with her own shirt and left to die in the most secluded area of the park. When officers took the youths to the precinct around 11 p.m., Trisha Miley was still hidden off the path in an isolated area of Central Park. She was bleeding and barely alive. Officers made phone calls to the boys' parents, who soon began to arrive at the police station. Around 1:30 a.m., Vincenio Moore, an unemployed construction worker, and Carlos Colon, a welder, were walking back to their apartments on the east side. As they walked through the park, they suddenly heard moaning coming from the side of the path. There they saw a blood-soaked body. The sight was so horrific that both started running. They ran until they came across two police officers sitting in a parked car on the corner of East Avenue. The two men told the officers that there was a badly beaten man down by the path. The officers approached and quickly realized it was a woman. She was naked except for her sports bra, which had been pushed up around her armpits. Trisha Miley arrived at the Metropolitan Hospital at 2:29 a.m. by ambulance. She had lost 75% of the blood in her body. Her body temperature was close to 85 degrees, and she was pronounced likely to die. The officers at the Central Park precinct had intended to send the youths home with a summons, but at 3 a.m., Detective Jose Rosario, who had been dispatched to the Metropolitan Hospital to check on the jogger, called the Central Park precinct. He ordered the desk officers to continue to hold the teenagers. A woman had been raped and she was likely going to die. Suddenly, a matter that would have been resolved in family court was now a major case. Investigators immediately charged the 5 Black and Latino teens: Antron McCray, 15, Yusuf Salman, 15, Kevin Richardson, 15, Raymond Santana, 14, and Corey Wise, 16, became known as the Central Park Five. News of the attack blew up in the media. Racial tension was high. On April 21st, 1989, the New York Daily News reported that on the night of the crime, a 30-person gang, or so-called wolf pack, of teens launched a series of attacks on multiple citizens. According to New York Magazine, police told reporters teens used the word wilding to describe their acts of violence. For months, the front pages depicted the teens as symbols of violence and called them bloodthirsty animals. 4 of the 5 teens, all from Harlem, confessed on videotape after hours of interrogation. The boys later recanted and pled not guilty, saying their confessions had been coerced. The boys claimed that the police deprived them of food and water and sleep for more than 24 hours. Under duress, they falsely confessed. Even though there were no eyewitnesses, many inconsistencies, and no DNA evidence, in 1990, McCray, Solomon, and Santana were found guilty of rape, assault, robbery, and riot. Richardson was found guilty of attempted murder, rape, assault, and robbery. Corey was found guilty of sexual abuse, assault, and riot. Their sentences ranged between 5 and 15 years behind bars. In 2002, Matias Reyes confessed to the attack against Trisha Miley. He was a convicted serial rapist and murderer, currently serving time for another incident. Matias Reyes was a positive DNA match to evidence found at the crime scene. On December 19, 2002, the New York Supreme Court Justice vacated the convictions of the 5 previously accused men. In 2003, the Central Park Five filed a civil lawsuit against New York City for malicious prosecution, racial discrimination, and emotional distress. For more than 10 years, city officials fought the case. They eventually settled for $40 million. According to the New York Times, the payout equaled $1 million for each year of imprisonment. They received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. A devastating injustice has happened here. These boys will never get that time back. The fact that they spent so many years in jail, labeled as rapists, has to change you as a human being. It was especially disturbing hearing how the veteran police officers lied and misled these boys. Hopefully more people begin to understand that false confessions are a real problem happening in our criminal justice system today.